All right, so before you can start building a machine, you need to figure out what operating system you're going to use. The operating system is the underlying massive piece of software, if you will, that allows you to run all the stuff that you're going to run for your gaming endeavors. So I'm going to go over the three main options you have, but really there's only one answer here, and that answer is going to be Windows, and that's probably going to upset a few people, but there's reasons for this, and I'll explain those. But let's start with the first one. This is going to be a small section because to me this is the most irrelevant of them all, which is macOS. Apple has been producing machines for a while, and while they've made machines that are seen as high end, they're kind of useless to me, in my opinion. They're not great gaming machines. They're expensive for what they are. And yes, I know people always talk about their displays, but it's not like you can't get a really good display produced by another manufacturer that is going to give you great display without having to overspend on a Mac that has lots of issues. Um, and to go forward with another portion of this video isn't going to be for those that are like, well, I can just make it work. If that is you, then you don't need any of these guides. But I've been down that path and it's very exhausting. So carrying on here with macOS though, the machines are not very expandable. And that for me is reason number one why I would never buy a Mac of any type for gaming, is that they're not expandable. There's not a good path to upgrade on those. And once they're done, they're done. I have used Macs before. I used them when I was in college. I had a Mac after that for not, too long before I ended up switching over to a Windows machine just because the upgrade availability and the versatility of what it can do. There's the software limitations. Yes, I know a lot more apps have been made available for macOS, but when it comes to limitations on what you can do for gaming and software in general, it's just kind of a no for me. It's too limited. I find that the people that like Macs tend to be fans of Apple and will die on that hill no matter what. There's not really a good way to get them to see that they're not getting a really good product. A lot of people in that camp seem to be of the idea that because they're paying more, they're getting a bunch more. And that's not necessarily the case. And again, I think it's poor value for the money. I think that you can build better. I took a quick look at recent pricing and I see models going for 1,400 and $2,000. That's just not worth it in my opinion. And it's also proprietary hardware. You're locked into using Apple hardware. And again, with a lack of expansion, that's going to be a deal killer for me. So I know people would argue that you can put, programs on, let you run Windows apps natively. But if that's the point of getting gaming to work on there, then why not just get a Linux box and then just do the same thing for a fraction of the cost, right? There is no point in having to work harder after you've spent more on the Mac OS base to be able to get diminishing returns of what you're going to be able to get. Because you're going to continuously have to work harder to get stuff to work that was never intended to work on there. And again, that's exhausting. I've done that for years. Did not enjoy the experience. It just became this struggle of, I don't get to have fun playing games. I get to have the troubleshooting experience and then maybe get to play some games. And it became exhausting. So, no, not for me. Next up would be Linux. Linux is one that a lot of content creators on YouTube here love to push out. The versatility of Linux. Linux is just so great. It can do so many things. And gaming on Linux now is not the gaming it used to be. And I'll give them that. It's not what it used to be, but it's not where it should be. And that's not necessarily the fault of Linux, but of manufacturers of hardware and of game developers that have just not really bridged that gap yet. And anti-cheat is a huge deal with that. Now, Linux, when we talk Linux, this is also the reason why I'm not really interested in getting a Steam box with the price where it's at there. At this point, getting a Steam box, in my opinion, as a gaming rig is the same as spending for Mac OS. It's the same. And, there's this problem where people who run Linux, and more power to them, I get what they're trying to push. There are a lot of great things about Linux. Unfortunately, for the common user, this is not going to be something they're going to be sold into. Having worked on, in IT, having worked on multiple projects where we converted offices to Linux, where we've converted users over to Linux, users that were enthusiastic about it, by the way, we always found that after a short period of time, anywhere from 6 months to a year, every one of those users was wanting to get rid of the Linux boxes and replace them with Windows machines because it just was not doing what they needed. The process was painful and they just did not like the experience. And look, I get that the Linux supporters really want to push it out there, and they've got good reason to. For security reasons, for, freedom of use reasons, there are a lot of good reasons to get Linux to be a good replacement, but it is just not there enough for the common user. And especially if people that are going to be getting into gaming that may not have a technical background, they're not going to be interested in having to troubleshoot their workstation every single time they need something. A lot of people are not really interested in going into a command line interface and having to sudo apt-get everything they need. I know there are marketplaces, but there's still a lot of stuff you have to use. I recently tried to get a laptop working to be kind of a Windows replacement and ended up being more of a pain to work with and set up. I'm glad Linux is free, but the cost of free is a little bit too expensive for some people. And I have a tech background and I don't want to mess with that. It's exhausting. I think that when you're in your 20s and 30s, maybe it's fun, but there comes a point when your time is very valuable to you, and having to spend hour upon hour, just troubleshooting something as simple as I want my machine to do this when it should just work out of the box is not a good user experience. In order for a Linux system to be a good experience, it has to do everything Windows does at a minimum to be comparable. And unfortunately it doesn't. And there are far too many reasons to list here at this point for that. But plus the lack of apps that work the same and the apps that, need to function. I can give tons of examples where I was just like, I'm not doing this. I'll move to something else. While you can get more out of your hardware on Linux, and that's great, unfortunately for gaming, there's restrictions, and that's what we're going to jump to here, which is if you're running the Steam machine or Steam Deck, you're going to be using Proton to get games working, right? Which is a great piece of software. It is amazing for what it does. Unfortunately, it leaves a large loop out, and I'll have a graphic up here, a full screen graphic that shows you the games that do not work with Proton DB. And if you go to Proton DB, you can view a list of games that are supported, and they have a breakdown on protondb.com that has most borked. And I should note that list is not sortable when you go into the most borked. It just kind of pops up a random list. I wanted to see games that absolutely do not work and why. So for that, you're going to have to go to Fix Wanted as the drop down. That's what I'm reading from some notes here. And then that'll show you all the games in red that don't work. And most borked will show you games that still have issues. They work, but they still have issues. And if, for example, the Steam box is going to be the same as the Steam Deck in terms of how it functions, I'm assuming it's going to be, and that's going to be most of the experience with Linux, then for me, if I'm paying anywhere over $1,000 to play games on a machine, and the tag that kept putting out runs perfectly after tweaks, you are now asking a group of people who are going to spend money to play games to do work before they could play games. That is a horrible marketing pitch, and it's going to turn the average user off. In addition, the reason that the Steam products are kind of still not great is that a lot of the modern games that are out are just not going to work on there. Crimson Desert was listed as working with issues. That's not the experience people want to have. They want to have the experience of playing a game like that or any of the other AAA titles to work out of the box. If it doesn't work out of the box, that's going to be somebody that's not going to enjoy that experience. And again, for $1,000 or more, I had better be able to just play the game after installing it. There shouldn't be this whole process of troubleshooting drivers, troubleshooting compatibility, tweaking settings to an nth degree. There really shouldn't be to that. And so, and then one piece of advice I found about running Fortnite. Fortnite's still a popular title. When it came to running Fortnite on Steam Deck, which I'm assuming is going to be the same for the Steam machine, was just install Windows on your device. If you're going to install Windows on a device, you might as well just build a Windows device instead of paying, even $1,000 for a lesser machine meant to run Linux. Because while it may run Linux well, Linux does use resources better if you don't know that. That is definitely a plus of using Linux. Any distro, any flavor of Linux, if you will, is that it will run superbly better on hardware. The operating system will. Doesn't mean the software will, though. And if you're just going to throw a different flavor of Linux on a Steam box or on a Steam Deck, or you're going to install Windows into those devices, it's not worth buying that device because that was not the original intended purpose of that device. I appreciate that there are communities that make things like Doom run on anything, and that's great. It shows that they can do those things, and it shows there's possibility for software to run in ways it maybe shouldn't have. But for the common user, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should, because then you're opening up additional avenues of where support is going to be needed that may not exist. Now, Linux has a great community for support. Apple's got their own community, but when it comes to support with Windows, that's going to be the widest scope of support there is with multiple resources. In addition to that, issues that happen on Windows are easier to troubleshoot, which means if somebody has a problem, it's easier for them to reach out, even if it's something as simple as Reddit, to get help, even though it's not the best place I would advise to get help at. But it makes it easier for them to get support and troubleshoot issues. Generally, when I look at what issues are happening with a game, I notice that multiple people are having the same problem, and it either is an issue with a specific piece of hardware, a configuration of settings, or it's an issue with the game developer themselves. It limits it to 3 things. And I don't always see combinations of those. It can happen, it does happen, but when you get into Linux, it can be any number of problems. And instead of there being a resolution, what you'll end up with is, sorry, it just won't run here. This isn't intended to work this way. That's just the best it gets. It'll run, but you're going to have those problems. Those are not good answers. They're not. Since I built my new machine and even my old machine, I never really had any issues playing games or running games. If there was an issue, it could usually be tracked back to a setting change that I made. There was nothing confusing about that. I could find the information easily if I didn't know, or I could troubleshoot it fairly easily. So it made it really simple to figure out what was going on. When you start having to get users into Linux, they're going to have to do additional steps to do troubleshooting because they have a foreign operating system. So for the common person, macOS and Linux are not the solution for gaming. And it's just with Windows, it's a proven method, if you will. Doesn't mean there's not things you should do, but out of the box, somebody could just use Windows for their gaming experience and be absolutely fine. Should they do additional work? Should you do additional work to secure OS? Yeah, absolutely. For myself, I ran Winslop to clean some stuff up, but I also have a tech background, so I know things to look for and what to do. And there's a lot of videos around from trusted sources that will tell you how you can clean up your Windows 11 install so that you're not being tracked, as much. But if you think that you're not going to get tracked on like Mac OS, that's kind of a fallacy. You're going to be, it's just going to be a little bit different. That's like saying shopping online at Walmart.com is safer than shopping at Amazon.com. It's not. It's going to be similar in terms of what's happening. And then with Linux, there have been issues in the past where there was one point where I was using Ubuntu and it had Amazon integration in, which I did not like. So I had to work to remove that. So on the whole, though, I will give credit where credit's due. Linux does have cleaner installations, some that are completely clean because you have options out there. But the sacrifice with completely clean is less software, less gaming availability. So you have a computer, and yes, there's alternatives. But when it comes down to the common user, unfortunately, those operating system options with Linux are not at a point yet where you're going to get the common user to be able to stick with that. They're going to grow tired of it and want to go back to what they're used to and what works. That's just what there is. So that's where I'm at with that. Is for your build, especially with the hardware we would look at, you're going to want to be running a Windows build. Yes, you can take any old computer case and you can, as long as the hardware is functional, you can put Linux on it and it's going to work as a machine, pretty much any machine. The compatibility is going to be the big issue there. And so you have to ask yourself, do you want to be spending tons of hours troubleshooting issues, or do you want to be spending time actually gaming? And for me at this point, I would rather not spend a few hours troubleshooting just to get to game for an hour. I would rather game for a few hours, not having to troubleshoot things. A lot of channels that I've seen, they really promote how easy Linux is to use and install. They've even done full videos showing how to do that, and I appreciate that. I think it's a great resource. But again, as much as you may think you're telling your audience how easy it is to do something, you're also not making them aware of the number of issues. I've seen these videos encouraging people to install Linux as a trial base, which you can do, but not explaining the issues they're going to have when they try to load up certain games. Let's also, to touch on this kind of out of order, but let's also not forget the anti-cheat issue. Again, I had a graphic up earlier that showed games that won't work, specific because of anti-cheat. It's a lot of AAA titles. And unfortunately, the market that we need to be able to get into PC gaming or upgrading their current rig into something is going to be people who play those games. And when you tell them that their favorite title is not something they can use, they're just not going to even bother. It doesn't matter what workaround you have. It doesn't matter. They're not going to want to spend the time on that. And I say this coming from a place of experience working in IT, where we had similar situations where client had piece of software they wanted. We said, yeah, we can make that work for you. We went through the hours upon hours of making it work for them. And at the end of the day, they're like, I just don't like the way it works now. It doesn't work the same. And I don't like the experience anymore. And that's a problem, because that's wasted time, wasted money, and wasted effort on something that didn't provide a better experience. And if anything, that user has now walked away going, I'm never going to use this operating system anymore because it is just not good enough for what I need. So I know it's going to upset a lot of the Linux enthusiasts out there. I know it's going to be upsetting to a lot of people who want alternatives. You know, again, when it comes to the Mac crowd, they think they have the most superior hardware. And I got to tell you, over my years of use and support of macOS stuff, that's a lot of marketing. You're not getting that much better. You're just not. And a lot of people, as has been a theme with this, people overbuy or overbuild, not realizing they're not taking advantage of that. There's people that claim the photography benefits of an iPhone, the screen, quality of a Mac. Apple doesn't produce the best monitors. They produce the best monitors and displays for their equipment, but that doesn't mean it's the best display for your equipment. And I see people who use exclusively Mac hardware do reviews of other hardware and they go, oh no, the Mac is the best, not giving it a fair review. And again, if we're looking at the standards I'm asking you to look at for building your machines, a HDR display for 4K is not going to matter if you're going to have to use upscaling, AI frame generation, all of that. You're wasting your money on hardware that's going to make slop try to look good. So I wouldn't do that. I advise not doing that at this point. There are a lot of people who have been in the Mac ecosystem since their college days, or that's all they've known. And so to them, that is a premier experience. That's all they've known. And I know just as many people on the Windows side who think that's the best experience they've ever had and have never used Mac or never used Linux. They all have their ups and downs, but when it comes to it, Windows has the most ups, in my opinion, for the usability section. That privacy-wise, oh no, garbage. Windows is garbage when it comes to privacy stuff. With Mac being a close second, and then, Linux being the safest bet, if you will. But again, for all these channels that profess getting people to use safer alternatives, it's the same between getting somebody to switch from a Samsung phone or an Apple phone, an iPhone, over to some blackout phone with a ton of security features. The experience is not going to work the same. For a person who's technical like me or one of these other technical channels, they're used to those roadblocks. They'll deal with them. They will have no problem dealing with them. But the general public who's going to be buying into products is not prepared to, doesn't want to, and is not willing to deal with the sacrifice of ease of use for safety. They're not going to. So what we can do, and this is probably going to be an unpopular opinion, but what we can do is keep them on something they're familiar with and then work with them to start, tightening security down. It will be tons easier to get somebody to use a Windows operating system and have them run WinSlop to clean it up than it will to say, scrap your Windows install, go buy a Linux box, go buy hardware and build a Linux machine. It's not going to happen because they're already committed to where they're at. So communities that work on making the Windows environment safer for those people, that's where it's at. That's where it's going to be. We're just not going to see, Linux take over more than it is if people can't see a clear path to support. And again, it's got to be good support and it's got to be thought of. Everything has to be taken care of for the user before they're into it. Because if they get to a point where they're starting to have troubles and it keeps happening, no matter how well intentioned, they're not going to keep using that machine. And that's pretty much all there is. So this will be a shorter video just because there wasn't as much to cover, but I'll leave links to the lists on ProtonDB so you can look at those. But yeah, at this point, guys, the Windows option is the best option, especially for the hardware we're going to be looking at, because we're moving on to hardware next. Um, and for your money too, if you're going to spend 1,400, to 2 grand on a machine on a Mac, you're throwing your money away because you can't expand on those, and you're going to have to buy a new machine before too long. You're not looking at that 10 to 15 year cycle, especially when it comes to gaming. I would say on the Mac side, you're probably looking at 5 years if you're going to be lucky at that. And then maybe if you're using it for other stuff, you'll get longer out of it. Linux, the hardware is going to last you a lot longer, but again, compatibility might be an issue. And sure, if you don't mind waiting years upon years for fixes to come out for Proton DB or for the Linux side of things, it may be a viable machine. But again, where I'm targeting this video is people that want to get into gaming, or were on an older machine or looking to upgrade and not sure what to do. I'm telling them now, for ease of use and compatibility, it's Windows at this point. So anyways, if you guys have any questions, comments, whatnot, leave them below in the comment section. Like, share, follow, do all that stuff. Again, we're going to move into hardware next. I think the next video will probably be over cases is what it'll be. We'll talk about what types of cases to use, why, those kind of things, how that can affect pricing on a machine, all those different, little things in there. Because a lot of people don't realize that the type of case you get can greatly affect, a lot of price points, from what kind of cooling you need to the size of the motherboard you're going to need, and what that means as far as expandability later on. So anyway, yep. Again, just leave anything you got below in the comment section, and I'll be glad to interact with you guys. And until next time, thanks, guys.